The pot roast was still steaming when Cindy stood up and ruined everything. Harold Mitchell had been setting out the good china, Emma's wedding pattern with the little blue roses, when his daughter-in-law pushed back her chair and announced, loud enough for all 15 family members to hear, "Harold, I'm breaking up with you as my father-in-law." The dining room went quiet, except for the tick of Emma's grandfather clock and someone's nervous giggle from the far end of the table. Harold's weathered hands stilled on the serving spoon, gravy dripping back into the boat. The smell of Sunday dinner, onions and carrots, and that herb blend Emma always used, seemed to thicken in the sudden silence. Cindy wasn't done. "I just can't deal with your weird behavior anymore. It's creepy how you stare at me, and the way you touch my shoulder. Inappropriate." More laughter now. Cousin Janet actually snorted. Harold looked up at his son Tommy, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But Tommy just studied his mashed potatoes like they held the secrets of the universe. "I understand, Cindy," Harold said quietly. "I'll respect your wishes." But that was only the beginning. The laughter spread like spilled coffee across Emma's white tablecloth. Cindy wasn't finished with her performance. She tucked a strand of bleached hair behind her ear, a gesture Harold had once thought was nervous, but now recognized as calculated. "I mean, I've tried to be patient. We all know how hard it's been since Emma passed. But some of the things he says..." She let that hang in the air like smoke from a grease fire. "What kind of things?" This from Harold's sister Ruth, leaning forward with the hunger of someone who'd driven 3 hours for gossip as much as pot roast. "Oh, I probably shouldn't." Cindy's voice carried just the right note of reluctance. "It's just, last week when I was doing dishes, he came up behind me and whispered something about how I reminded him of Emma when she was young. Then he put his hands on my waist." Harold's fork clattered against his plate. "I said you had the same apron pattern, and I steadied you when you slipped on the wet floor." "See?" Cindy's eyes went wide, wounded. "He doesn't even remember it right. That's what scares me." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harold could feel eyes on him, some sympathetic, others calculating. His nephew Brad cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted more rolls, but his voice sounded strained. Tommy finally looked up. "Dad, maybe you should apologize." The words hit Harold like a fist to the chest. Not, "That's not what happened," or "Cindy must have misunderstood." Just apologize. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Harold had been keeping peace his whole life. When his boss passed him over for promotion to give it to his nephew. When the church board voted to tear down the old sanctuary Emma loved. When the new doctor talked to him like he was already halfway to the grave. "Keep your head down, Harold. Don't cause trouble." "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable," he heard himself say. Cindy smiled. A thin, satisfied smile that reminded Harold of a cat with cream on its whiskers. "I appreciate that, Harold. I really do. I just think it would be better if we had some boundaries from now on." "What kind of boundaries?" asked Cousin Janet, who lived for drama like plants lived for sunlight. "Well, I think Harold should call before coming over. And maybe it's better if he doesn't help with dishes or cooking anymore, just until he works through whatever he's going through." The grandfather clock chimed 7:30. Outside, a screen door slammed somewhere down the street. The normal sounds of Sunday evening in a small town, but they felt distant now, like Harold was listening from underwater. "That seems reasonable," said Ruth, and Harold wondered when reasonable had come to mean treating a 63-year-old man like a registered sex offender. "I should probably check with the doctor, too," Cindy continued, warming to her theme, "about the memory issues. Sometimes he tells the same story 3 times in one conversation." That got nods around the table. Harold felt his face burning. He did sometimes repeat himself. Who didn't at his age? But Cindy made it sound like dementia instead of just the natural drift of an old man's mind. Tommy reached over and patted Harold's shoulder. "We just want what's best for you, Dad." Harold looked around the table at these people, his family, and saw pity in their eyes. Poor old Harold, lost without Emma, getting a little strange, a little too friendly with his son's wife. Better to humor him than confront him. The worst part was how reasonable it all sounded. How could he defend himself without looking defensive? How could he explain that he'd never meant anything inappropriate without sounding like he was making excuses? He couldn't. That was the beauty of Cindy's trap. "I think I'll help clear the table," Harold said, standing up. "Oh no." Cindy's hand fluttered to her throat. "Remember what we just talked about? Boundaries?" Harold sat back down like a scolded child. The room went quiet again, this time with embarrassment. Not for Cindy, but for him. After that, conversation limped along like a three-legged dog. People asked about his garden, his health, his plans for the winter, but their voices carried that particular tone reserved for the elderly and infirm. Kind, patient, careful. When everyone finally left, car doors slamming, engines turning over, voices calling goodbyes through rolled-down windows, Harold stood in his kitchen loading the dishwasher alone. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier. He'd been reaching for his wallet to tip the delivery boy if any leftovers needed boxing up, when he realized it wasn't in its usual spot by the coffee pot. Harold checked his pockets, then the counter, then the dining room table. Nothing. His wallet was gone, and for the first time that evening, Harold Mitchell started to wonder if Cindy's performance had been about more than just humiliation. Harold searched the house like a man looking for his own grave. The wallet wasn't in the couch cushions, or under the dining room table, or in any of the logical places a thing might fall. He checked Emma's old purse on the hallway table. Sometimes he'd absent-mindedly tucked things in there when his hands were full, but found only her reading glasses and a roll of peppermints that still smelled like her perfume. By the time he'd turned the kitchen upside down, sweat was beading on his forehead despite the October chill seeping through the windows. The wallet held his driver's license, credit cards, and about $60 cash. More importantly, it held the picture of Emma from their honeymoon in Branson, her hair wild from the wind off Table Rock Lake. He was checking behind the refrigerator when someone knocked on his back door. "Harold? You all right in there?" Martha Henderson stood on his porch with a covered dish in her hands, and concern written across her face. At 61, she was still handsome in the way of women who'd worked hard but not bitter, with silver hair she kept in a practical bob and eyes the color of November sky. "I'm fine, Martha. Just looking for something." "Mind if I come in? I brought you some of that apple crisp you like." Harold hesitated. After Cindy's performance, he wasn't sure he wanted any more female company tonight. But Martha had been his neighbor for 8 years, ever since her husband Pete died of the cancer, and she'd never been anything but kind. "Course." "Come on in." Martha stepped into his kitchen and took one look at the overturned chairs and open drawers. "Goodness! Lose something important?" "My wallet. Had it when everyone came for dinner, but now it's gone." "Well, let's think logically." Martha set the crisp on the counter and rolled up her sleeves. "When did you last remember having it?" "Before dinner. Always keep it by the coffee pot when I'm cooking." "And it was there when folks arrived?" Harold closed his eyes, trying to remember. "Think so. Yeah, I'm sure of it." Martha nodded and started systematically searching the dining room while Harold watched. She moved like a nurse, efficient, thorough, missing nothing. Under the china cabinet, behind the curtains, even inside the piano bench, where no wallet had any business being. "Harold," she said after a few minutes, her voice careful, "that business with Cindy tonight, that was hard to watch." Harold's face went hot. "You heard?" Windows were open. Sound carries. Martha straightened up from checking under the sideboard. "Pete and I always said you were one of the good ones. Never saw you do anything inappropriate with anybody." The relief that flooded through Harold was so strong it nearly buckled his knees. Someone believed him. Someone who'd been watching, who knew. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm not just saying it. I saw what I saw." Martha paused by Emma's china cabinet, studying the family photos Harold kept there. "Saw some other things, too, if I'm being honest." "Such as?" "Such as Cindy coming out of your house last Tuesday afternoon when you were at your doctor's appointment. Had a key, let herself right in, spent about an hour here." Harold felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She was supposed to be picking up that casserole dish Emma lent her." "Took her an hour to find a casserole dish?" The two of them looked at each other across Emma's dining room. Outside, a dog was barking, and someone was starting up a lawnmower even though the sun was nearly down. Normal neighborhood sounds that felt suddenly ominous. "Martha, I think someone took my wallet." "I think you might be right." She moved to the window and peered out between the lace curtains. "Question is, why would someone want to make you think you'd lost it?" Harold joined her at the window. Across the street, the Kowalski kids were playing in their yard under the porch light, their voices bright in the gathering darkness. Everything looked normal, peaceful, safe. But something had shifted tonight. Some balance had been upset, and Harold couldn't shake the feeling that losing his wallet was just the beginning. "There's something else," Martha said quietly. "Emma came to see me about 3 weeks before she passed. Said she'd been having dreams about you being in some kind of trouble. Asked me to keep an eye out." "Dreams? You know how Emma was with her intuitions." "Never wrong about people." Martha touched his arm gently. "She was worried about Cindy specifically. Said something didn't sit right with her about that girl." Harold's throat tightened. Emma had mentioned her concerns once or twice, but he'd chalked it up to the natural wariness of an older woman toward her son's young wife. Now he wondered if he should have listened more carefully. "Did she say what kind of trouble?" "Financial trouble. Said she'd been noticing little things, bills that seemed off, bank statements that didn't look right. She was going to talk to you about it, but then she died suddenly of a heart attack, taking her suspicions with her." Harold walked back to the kitchen and opened Emma's old recipe box, the wooden one he'd made for their 10th anniversary. She'd kept more than recipes in here. Warranty cards, important phone numbers, receipts for major purchases. And tucked behind the card for beef stew, he found an envelope with his name on it in Emma's careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Harold, if something happens to me, look in the bottom drawer of my jewelry box. I've been keeping track of things that worry me. Love always, Em." Martha read over his shoulder. "Did you ever look in that drawer?" "Couldn't bring myself to go through her things yet." "Maybe it's time." They climbed the stairs to the bedroom Emma had loved, with its white eyelet curtains and the antique vanity her mother had given her. The jewelry box sat exactly where she'd left it, a music box that played "The Way You Look Tonight" when you opened the lid. Harold's hands shook as he pulled out the bottom drawer. Inside were bank statements going back 6 months, each one marked with Emma's neat pencil notations. Discrepancies circled in red. Questions written in the margins. Who authorized this withdrawal? Why is the balance different than our records? And at the very bottom, a business card for a lawyer in town with a handwritten note. Called about protecting assets. Meeting scheduled for Thursday. Emma had died on Tuesday. Martha whistled low. She was putting together a case. Harold sank onto the bed, his legs suddenly unsteady. Emma had been trying to protect him, and he'd never even known there was something to protect against. "I need to call the bank," he said. "Tomorrow," Martha agreed. "Tonight, you need to decide what you're going to do about that wallet." Harold looked at her, this woman who'd known him for 8 years and trusted him enough to search his house and believe his story. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if someone took it, they had a reason. Could be they're planning to use those credit cards. Could be they just wanted you to think you were losing your mind, getting forgetful." Martha's eyes were steady on his. "Either way, Harold Mitchell, someone's playing games with you." The grandfather clock downstairs chimed 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, he'd call the bank. Tomorrow, he'd try to make sense of Emma's notes and figure out what she'd discovered. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Harold didn't feel quite so alone. Outside, a car door slammed, and footsteps came up his front walk. The footsteps belonged to Tommy. Harold's son stood on the front porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Through the screen door, he looked younger than his 35 years. Like the boy who used to come home with scraped knees and wounded pride, looking for his mother to patch him up. "Dad, can I come in?" Harold glanced at Martha, who nodded and started gathering up Emma's papers. "I'll take these home and make copies," she whispered. "Give you two some privacy." She slipped out the back door as Tommy came through the front, and Harold was grateful for her discretion. Whatever this was about, it needed to be between father and son. "Coffee?" Harold offered, though his hands were still unsteady from the evening's discoveries. "Sure." Tommy sat heavily at the kitchen table, the same spot where he'd done homework 20 years ago. "Dad, about tonight." Harold busied himself with the coffee maker, measuring grounds with more care than necessary. The familiar ritual steadied him: 2 scoops for regular coffee, 3 if you wanted it strong, which tonight he did. "Cindy feels terrible about how that went," Tommy said. Harold's hand stilled on the coffee can. "Does she now?" "She didn't mean for it to sound so harsh. It's just, she's been worried about you. We both have." The coffee started percolating, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Harold took 2 mugs from the cabinet, his usual one with the faded John Deere logo and the blue one Emma had used for her morning tea. "Worried about what exactly?" Tommy shifted in his chair. "You've been different since Mom died. More, I don't know, clingy. You call every day, sometimes twice. You show up unannounced. Last week you told me the same story about your high school football coach 3 times in one conversation." Harold poured the coffee, added sugar to Tommy's the way he'd liked it since he was 16. "I call because I miss talking to your mother. I visit because this house gets quiet. And maybe I repeat myself sometimes because I'm 63 years old, and my brain doesn't work like it used to. I know, Dad. I get it. But Cindy, she's not used to having such an involved father-in-law. Her dad was never around much." Harold set the mug in front of his son and studied his face. Tommy looked tired, older than he should at 35. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the coffee. "Son, when's the last time you had a good night's sleep?" Tommy's laugh was hollow. What's that got to do with anything? You look like hell, like you're carrying the weight of the world. Harold sat across from him. Talk to me. For a moment, Tommy's careful composure cracked. His shoulders sagged, and he rubbed his face with both hands. Everything's fine, Dad. Just work stress, you know. But Harold didn't know. Tommy worked as a manager at the grain elevator, the same job he'd held for 8 years. Steady work, decent pay, nothing that should put those kinds of shadows under a man's eyes. How are things with you and Cindy? Really? They're fine. Good. Great, actually. Tommy's voice picked up speed the way it had when he was a teenager lying about breaking curfew. She's got her own way of doing things. And having you around so much makes her nervous. Harold sipped his coffee and chose his words carefully. Tommy, has Cindy ever asked you about our family finances? What? No. Why would she? But Tommy's eyes didn't quite meet his father's. No reason. Just wondering. Harold got up to check the sugar bowl, mostly to give his hands something to do. It's just that your mother kept track of our bank statements, and some things seemed off before she died. Off how? Small withdrawals. Nothing major, but things she didn't remember making. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. Dad, are you sure Mom didn't just forget? Toward the end, she was having some memory issues. Your mother's mind was sharp as a tack right up until the heart attack. But she was sick, Dad. Maybe sicker than we knew. Maybe she was confused about Thomas. Harold used the full name he'd reserved for serious conversations since Tommy was 5 years old. Your mother was not confused. She was investigating something, and I think she was onto something important. Tommy stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the linoleum. Dad, listen to yourself. You're talking like there's some conspiracy, like someone was stealing from you. Maybe someone was. Who? Me? Cindy? The bank? Tommy's voice rose with each question. Dad, this is exactly the kind of thing that worries us. This paranoid thinking, these accusations. Harold felt the evening's frustrations bubbling up in his chest. I'm not being paranoid. I'm being careful. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're seeing threats where there aren't any, making problems where none exist. Tommy grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. Maybe Cindy was right. Maybe you do need to talk to someone. Someone like who? Like a doctor, like a counselor, someone who can help you work through this grief or whatever it is that's making you think your own family is plotting against you. The words hit Harold like a slap. His son, the boy he'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball and change a tire, was looking at him like he was a stranger, like he was dangerous. Tommy, wait. Harold reached out, but Tommy was already heading for the door. I love you, Dad. We both do. But you're scaring us. Tonight it was hard to watch. The way you looked at Cindy, the things you were implying. I didn't imply anything. You didn't have to. It was written all over your face. Tommy paused with his hand on the doorknob. Just think about what I said, okay? About getting some help. After Tommy left, Harold sat alone at his kitchen table with 2 cups of cooling coffee. The house settled around him with the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood, but the sounds offered no comfort tonight. He was reaching for Tommy's abandoned cup when he saw it, his credit card lying on the floor under the table where it had been dropped or kicked. Harold picked it up, studying the familiar blue and silver plastic. Someone had gone through his wallet, taken what they wanted, and carelessly discarded the rest. But they'd kept the wallet itself, probably to make him think he'd simply lost it. The clock on the stove read 9:47. Martha's kitchen light was still on across the yard. Harold could see her silhouette moving around, probably organizing Emma's papers into neat piles the way she organized everything else in her orderly life. For the first time since Emma died, Harold Mitchell didn't feel completely alone in the world. But he was beginning to understand that not being alone and being safe were two entirely different things. The bank manager had the kind of smile that promised bad news. Harold sat in the small conference room off the main lobby, watching Jim Hartley shuffle through papers with the practiced efficiency of a man who delivered difficult financial news to half the county. They'd gone to high school together 40 years ago, back when Jim was skinny and stuttered, and Harold could throw a football 60 yards in a good wind. Now Jim wore a suit that probably cost more than Harold's monthly Social Security check, and his voice was smooth as butter on warm bread. "I'm afraid we have a problem, Harold." Martha squeezed Harold's elbow from the chair beside him. She'd insisted on coming, said 2 sets of ears were better than 1 when money talk got complicated. Harold was grateful for her steady presence. "What kind of problem?" Jim slid a stack of photocopied checks across the table. "These were written on your account over the past 4 months. Total of about $1,800. Harold studied the checks. His name was signed at the bottom in handwriting that looked like his own, but felt wrong somehow. Too careful, too deliberate, like someone had practiced. "I didn't write these." "Are you certain? The signature matches our records." "Jim, I've been banking here for 26 years. You think I don't know my own signature?" Jim's smile flickered. "Of course not. It's just, well, sometimes, as we get older, our handwriting changes. Medications can affect fine motor control. Stress can make us forget small transactions." Harold felt heat rising in his chest. First his son, now his banker. Everyone so concerned about his aging mind, his failing memory, his declining competence. "My handwriting is fine. My memory is fine. Someone forged my signature. I understand your concern, but there's more." Jim pulled out another set of papers. 3 weeks ago, someone came in with your power of attorney authorization to add an additional signer to your accounts. I never signed any power of attorney. The documentation appears to be in order, notarized, witnessed, all proper legal requirements met. Martha leaned forward. "Who was added as a signer?" Jim consulted his files. "Cynthia Mitchell, your daughter-in-law, Harold." The conference room felt like it was tilting. Harold gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. "Show me that document." Jim hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "Show me the goddamn document, Jimmy." The formality fell away from Jim's voice. This was the Harold Mitchell he remembered from high school, quiet most of the time, but with a backbone of steel when pushed too far. "All right, but Harold, if this signature is forged, we're talking about serious criminal charges." The power of attorney form looked official enough. Legal language, proper seals, Harold's signature at the bottom, but he'd never signed it, never even seen it before this moment. "Who notarized this?" "Sandra Phillips. She's been a notary for 15 years, very reliable." Harold knew Sandra. She worked part-time at the insurance office, had notarized papers for him before, but she'd never notarized this. "I want to see the original." That might be difficult to arrange." "Why?" Jim cleared his throat. "Because Mrs. Mitchell, Cynthia, she took the original with her for her records. Standard procedure." Martha made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so bitter. "How convenient." "Now see here." Jim's professional courtesy was wearing thin. I've known this family for years. I'm not suggesting anyone did anything improper. But Harold, you have to understand our position. If a customer comes in with proper documentation, proper forged documentation, we had no way of knowing it was forged. If it was forged. Harold stood up, his chair scraping against the carpet. Jim, I want you to freeze that account, right now, today. I can't do that without cause. Forgery isn't cause enough. We don't know that it's forgery. We only know you say you didn't sign it. Jim's voice took on the patronizing tone Harold was starting to recognize. Harold, have you been under any stress lately? Any major life changes, health concerns, family pressures? Harold wanted to reach across that table and grab Jim Hartley by his expensive tie, wanted to shake him until his teeth rattled, until he understood that being 63 didn't make a man an idiot. Instead, he said very quietly, I want copies of every transaction on that account for the past 6 months. I can provide those, of course. But Harold, if you're having concerns about your mental acuity, there are resources. Jimmy. Harold's voice cut through the banker's carefully practiced concern. You and I played football together. You remember that game against Parkville, fourth quarter, when Coach put you in at quarterback because Davidson got hurt? Jim blinked. Sure, but you remember what I told you in the huddle? No, I said, throw it to me on 3, I'll be open. And you did, and I caught it, and we won by 4 points. Okay, yes, I remember. My mind was sharp enough then to see what needed doing. It's sharp enough now to see what's being done to me. Harold gathered up the papers Jim had shown him. I'll be back tomorrow for those account records, all of them. Outside the bank, Martha took Harold's arm as they walked to her car. That went well. Did it? Oh, yes. You just scared a banker. That's no small accomplishment. Harold managed to smile despite everything. Emma always said you had a gift for finding the bright side. Emma was a wise woman. Martha unlocked her car and waited for Harold to get in. Question is, what do we do now? Harold buckled his seatbelt and stared at the bank building. Through the plate glass windows, he could see Jim Hartley on the phone, probably calling someone to report their conversation, probably calling Cindy. Now we figure out what else they've taken. Martha started the engine. They? Cindy didn't forge that power of attorney by herself. Someone helped her. Someone who knows the law, knows how to make documents look legitimate. Any ideas who? Harold was quiet for a moment, thinking about his son's hollow laugh, his trembling hands, the way he'd avoided eye contact when talking about Cindy. Yeah, I've got ideas. Want to share? Let's go home first. I need to call Tommy. But when they pulled into Harold's driveway, Tommy's truck was already there, and he wasn't alone. Cindy sat in the passenger seat, her blonde hair bright as sunlight through the windshield. She saw Harold and Martha and smiled, the same satisfied smile she'd worn at dinner the night before. Martha shut off the engine. Looks like they came to you. Harold watched his son and daughter-in-law get out of the truck, watched the way Tommy's shoulders were set like a man bracing for a fight. Martha, if this goes bad, it won't go bad. I won't let it. Harold looked at this woman who'd become his ally in the space of 2 days. This neighbor who believed him when his own family wouldn't. Why are you doing this? Helping me? Martha's eyes were steady on his. Because Pete would have wanted someone to help me if I'd needed it. Because Emma was my friend. And because some things are just right or wrong, Harold Mitchell, and what's being done to you is wrong. Tommy was walking toward the house now, his face set in the stubborn expression Harold remembered from teenage arguments about curfew and car keys. Cindy followed a step behind, her hand resting lightly on Tommy's back, in a gesture that looked supportive but felt possessive. Harold got out of Martha's car and walked to meet his son. "Dad, we need to talk." The conversation happened on Harold's front porch, with Martha as witness, and the October wind rattling the last leaves on Emma's maple tree. Tommy stood with his hands in his pockets, not quite meeting his father's eyes. Cindy perched on the porch railing like she owned the place, her legs swinging slightly, almost playful. "The bank called," Tommy said, without preamble. Harold settled into Emma's old rocking chair, the one she'd used for watching sunsets and neighborhood children playing in the street. The wood creaked under his weight, a familiar sound that steadied him. "I imagine they did. Dad, you can't just go in there making wild accusations. Jim Hartley's been good to our family." "Has he now?" Harold's voice was mild, conversational. "Good enough to let someone forge my signature and steal my money?" Cindy shifted on the railing, her smile faltering slightly. "Nobody stole anything, Harold. I was added to the account legally. Tommy asked me to help manage your finances because he was worried about you." Harold looked at his son. "That true, Tommy? You asked her to manage my finances?" Tommy's face flushed red. "Not exactly. I mean, not in so many words. But Cindy noticed you seemed confused about money sometimes, and she offered to help." "When did she notice that?" "When did she what?" "When did Cindy notice I seemed confused about money? Give me a specific example." Tommy opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted to Cindy, who nodded encouragingly. "Last month," Tommy said finally, "when you couldn't remember if you'd paid the electric bill." Harold rocked slowly in Emma's chair. "Son, I've been paying that electric bill on the 15th of every month for 26 years. Same amount, same account, same routine. The month you're talking about, I paid it early because I was going out of town to visit your Aunt Sarah. I showed you the receipt." You did?" "Tommy." Harold's voice was gentle but firm. "Who told you I couldn't remember paying the electric bill?" Silence stretched between them. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car door slammed. Normal sounds of a neighborhood going about its business while Harold's world continued to unravel. Cindy slid down from the railing, her movements suddenly less casual. "This is ridiculous. Tommy, we didn't come here to be interrogated." "No," Harold agreed. "You came here to do damage control after your forgery was discovered." "I didn't forge anything." Martha spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. "Then you won't mind if we have the signature analyzed by a handwriting expert." Cindy's eyes snapped to Martha, and for just a moment Harold saw something cold and calculating in his daughter-in-law's face. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded innocence. "I can't believe this. Tommy, are you going to let them treat me like a criminal?" Tommy looked torn, caught between loyalty to his wife and the growing evidence of his father's claims. "Maybe. Maybe we should just get the expert. Clear the air." "Clear the air?" Cindy's voice rose a pitch. "Tommy, your father is having a breakdown. He's making paranoid accusations, seeing conspiracies where none exist, and now he's got Martha here playing detective with him." Harold stopped rocking. "Cindy, where did you get the key to my house?" The question came out of nowhere, catching her off guard. "What key?" "The key you used to let yourself in last Tuesday when I was at the doctor." "Martha saw you." Cindy's face went pale, then flushed red. Tommy gave me a key. For emergencies. Harold looked at his son. You gave her a key to my house? Dad, I thought, in case something happened to you, someone needed to be able to get in and… Without asking me? Tommy's shoulders sagged. You would have said no. You're damn right I would have said no. Harold's voice stayed level, but Martha could see the effort it cost him. This is my house, son, mine and your mother's. You don't get to hand out keys like party favors. I was trying to help. By letting someone go through my private things when I'm not here? Cindy stepped forward, her hand on Tommy's arm. Tommy, let's go. This is getting ugly, and I don't want to be part of it anymore. But Tommy didn't move. For the first time since this whole mess started, he was looking at his father, really looking at him. Seeing the man who'd taught him to drive, and helped him through his divorce, and held him when his mother died. Dad, Tommy said quietly, are you telling me you think Cindy took money from your account without permission? Harold met his son's eyes. I'm telling you that someone forged my signature on a legal document that gave them access to my money. Someone who had a key to my house, an opportunity to study my handwriting, someone who's been trying to convince everyone that I'm losing my mind. That's insane, Cindy said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Is it? Harold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the credit card he'd found under the kitchen table. Tommy, do you know how I found this? Tommy stared at the card. Where did you find it? Under my kitchen table after dinner last night, after my wallet went missing. After someone went through it and took what they wanted. Cindy made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. You probably dropped it yourself and forgot. That's exactly the kind of thing that proves I'm losing my mind. Harold stood up from the rocking chair, his movement slow and deliberate. Cindy, I've been patient with you because you're family, because I love my son and I want him to be happy. But patience and stupidity aren't the same thing. Tommy was staring at the credit card like it was a snake. Dad, if what you're saying is true, then your wife is a thief and a liar, and she's been playing all of us for fools. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Cindy's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, fear, before settling on wounded dignity. Tommy, I don't have to listen to this. I'm going to the car. She walked down the porch steps with her head high, every inch the wronged woman. But Harold noticed she didn't deny the accusation. Tommy watched her go, then turned back to his father. Dad, I don't know what to think anymore. Harold sat back down in Emma's chair and resumed rocking. The motion soothed him, reminded him of evenings spent here with Emma, planning their retirement and watching the seasons change. Son, you don't have to think anything right now. You just have to decide whether you trust me enough to help me find out the truth. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you need me to do? And for the first time in days, Harold Mitchell felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and disappointment. Harold sat across from Robert Kemp's mahogany desk, with Martha on his left and Tommy on his right. His son had been quiet during the drive over, stealing glances at Harold like he was seeing a stranger. Or maybe like he was seeing his father clearly for the first time in months. Kemp was younger than Harold had expected, maybe 40, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested he specialized in more lucrative cases than small-town elder disputes. But he'd been Emma's choice, and Harold trusted his late wife's judgment more than his own these days. I've reviewed the documents you provided, Kemp said, spreading papers across his desk with the precision of a man who billed by the hour. The power of attorney appears legitimate on its face, but there are irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Tommy asked. Kemp picked up a magnifying glass, an old-fashioned touch that somehow made Harold feel more confident in the man's abilities. The notary's seal is correct, but the pressure patterns in the signature are inconsistent. See here? He pointed to Harold's name at the bottom of the document. The initial letters are much heavier than the rest, suggesting someone was copying rather than writing naturally. Harold leaned forward. So it's a forgery? Probably. But proving it in court would require expert testimony, and that's expensive. More to the point, the financial damage appears minimal so far, about $1,800 in questionable withdrawals. $1,800 is minimal? Tommy's voice carried an edge Harold hadn't heard since his son was a teenager arguing about allowance. In terms of elder fraud cases, yes, I've seen situations where hundreds of thousands were stolen. Kemp set down the magnifying glass and folded his hands. The question is what you want to do about it. Criminal prosecution is one option, but it would mean pressing charges against your daughter-in-law. That tends to complicate family relationships. Harold caught Martha's eye. She nodded slightly. They'd discussed this possibility on the drive over. What other options do I have? Civil recovery. Demand restitution, close the questionable accounts, change all your passwords and access codes. Treat it as a family matter rather than a criminal one. Tommy shifted in his chair. What would happen if we went the criminal route? If the forgery can be proven, fraud charges, possibly identity theft, your wife would be looking at substantial fines, possible jail time, and a felony record. The office went quiet, except for the tick of an antique clock on Kemp's bookshelf. Harold studied his son's face, watching the wheels turn behind his eyes. There's something else, Tommy said finally. Harold and Martha exchanged glances. What kind of something? Tommy pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, his hands trembling slightly. Cindy's been getting mail at our house, legal papers, collection notices. I thought it was junk mail, but after yesterday, he handed the envelope to Kemp, who examined it with professional interest. This is from a collections agency in Kansas City. Looks like your daughter-in-law has some outstanding debts. Kemp scanned the letter. Substantial ones. About $30,000 in credit card debt, plus penalties and interest. Harold felt something cold settle in his stomach. 30,000? Could explain the motivation for accessing your accounts, Kemp said. Desperate people make desperate choices. Tommy buried his face in his hands. Jesus, I had no idea. She said her credit was perfect. Said we could buy a house next year. Son, Harold's voice was gentle. How long has this been going on? The debts? I don't know. She always handled the bills, said she was better with money than me. Tommy looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Dad, I think I've been played for a fool. We all have, Harold said. Question is what we do now. Kemp cleared his throat. Before you decide anything, there's one more thing you should know. I ran a basic background check on Cynthia Mitchell after you called. She's been married before, twice. The office seemed to tilt slightly. Harold gripped the arms of his chair, steadying himself against this fresh revelation. Married before? First husband was a widower in Arkansas, about 15 years older than her. They divorced after 8 months amid allegations of financial impropriety. Second husband was in Oklahoma, similar situation. Both men were financially comfortable. Both ended up with depleted accounts. Tommy made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. She told me I was her first serious relationship. "I'm sorry," Kemp said, and his professional distance softened slightly. "But you need to know what you're dealing with. This appears to be a pattern of behavior." Harold looked at his son, really looked at him. Tommy had lost weight in recent months, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. How long had Cindy been working on him, convincing him that his father was declining, that drastic measures were necessary? "Tommy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. "Did Cindy ever suggest that I might need to be in a nursing home?" Tommy's face crumpled. She said you were getting dangerous, forgetting to turn off the stove, leaving doors unlocked. She was worried you'd hurt yourself." "When did I supposedly do these things?" "I don't know. She just told me about them, said she didn't want to worry me with details." Harold felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, but this time it was tempered with something else. Pity. His son had been manipulated as skillfully as he had, just in a different way. "Mr. Mitchell," Kemp said, "you have a decision to make. But before you make it, I'd recommend getting your assets protected immediately. New accounts, new passwords, new everything. And I'd suggest doing it today." Harold stood up, his joints protesting after an hour in the leather chair. "Martha, would you mind helping me with that?" "Of course." Tommy remained seated, staring at the collection letter in his hands. "Dad, what am I supposed to do? I love her. Or I thought I did. I don't even know anymore." Harold put his hand on his son's shoulder. "You're going to figure out who you married and why. And then you're going to decide if that's someone you want to spend your life with. And if it's not?" Harold thought about Emma, about 42 years of marriage built on honesty and trust and mutual respect, about the way his wife had tried to protect him even from beyond the grave. "Then you're going to remember that you're my son, and I didn't raise you to accept less than you deserve." Outside the lawyer's office, the October sun was bright and warm on Harold's face. He felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The truth was ugly, but it was still the truth, and that was better than living with comfortable lies. Martha took his arm as they walked to her car. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been in a fight," Harold said, "but like I might actually win it." Tommy caught up with them at the car, his face set with new determination. "Dad, I want to help. Whatever you need to do to fix this, I want to help." Harold looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw the boy he'd raised, the man Emma would have been proud of. "Good," he said, "because I think we're going to need all the help we can get." Behind them, Harold's cell phone buzzed with a text message. He pulled it out and read the screen, then showed it to Martha and Tommy. The message was from Cindy. "We need to talk. Meet me at the house. Come alone." Martha frowned. "That sounds like a threat." Tommy's jaw tightened. Or desperation. Harold slipped the phone back into his pocket. Only one way to find out. Harold's house had never felt like enemy territory before. He sat in his truck in the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled, watching Cindy pace back and forth in front of his living room window. She'd been waiting for him, probably watching from that window since she'd sent the text an hour ago. Martha had wanted to come with him, and Tommy had insisted on it, but Harold had refused both offers. Some conversations needed to happen without witnesses. Some truths could only come out in the dark. Cindy opened the front door before he'd even reached the porch steps. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice was different now. Smaller. The performance mask had slipped, revealing something rawer underneath. Harold followed her into his own living room and remained standing. He wasn't going to make himself comfortable for this conversation. You wanted to talk. Talk. Cindy sat on the edge of Emma's old sofa, her hands twisted together in her lap. Without the bright confidence she usually wore like armor, she looked younger, more fragile, almost afraid. "I know what you think you found out today," she began. "I don't think anything. I know what I found out. It's not what it looks like." Harold moved to the fireplace and leaned against the mantel, next to the wedding photo of him and Emma. 42 years ago, they'd been so young, so certain that love was enough to conquer anything. "What does it look like, Cindy?" "Like I married Tommy for his money." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, which is pretty funny considering he doesn't have any. "No, but I do." "Had." "You had money." Her voice hardened slightly. "Do you have any idea what it costs to live these days? What it takes just to get by?" Harold studied her face. Even now, caught red-handed, she was trying to justify what she'd done. "So you decided to help yourself to mine." "I decided to help my family, Tommy's family, your family." Cindy stood up and began pacing again, her movements sharp and agitated. "Do you know how much debt Tommy had when I met him? From his first marriage, from bad decisions, from just living. I've been trying to dig us out for 2 years. By digging me deeper in. By borrowing against your future inheritance. It's not like you'd miss it. You're comfortable, you own your house, you have steady income." Her voice was rising now, the careful control slipping away. "I was going to pay it back." "With what money?" "Tommy's getting promoted next month. Regional manager position. Better salary. Better benefits." "We could have paid you back within a year." Harold felt something crack inside his chest. The regional manager position at the grain elevator had been posted 6 months ago. It had gone to Bill Henderson's son-in-law. "Cindy, that job was filled months ago." Her pacing stopped. "What?" "The regional manager job. They gave it to Dave Peterson in August." For a moment, Cindy looked genuinely confused. Then her face crumpled, and Harold realized she'd been lying to herself as much as to everyone else. "I thought, Tommy said he was a finalist. He said they just needed to finish the paperwork. Tommy's a good worker, but he's not management material. Never has been." Harold's voice was gentle, despite everything. "Did he tell you he was getting promoted, or did you decide he was?" Cindy sank back onto the sofa, her face in her hands. "I needed him to be getting promoted. I needed there to be a way out that didn't involve—" She gestured vaguely around the room. "Didn't involve stealing from your husband's father? I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a few hundred to cover an emergency. Then the credit card companies started calling, and the interest kept piling up, and I thought if I could just get enough to make a big payment, get ahead of it." Harold moved to the chair across from her, his chair, the one he'd sat in every evening for 20 years to read the paper and talk with Emma about their days. "Cindy, how much do you actually owe?" $53,000, she whispered. "Maybe more." I stopped opening the statements. The number hit Harold like a physical blow. $53,000, more than he made in a year on Social Security and his small pension. Jesus Christ. I know how it sounds, I know how it looks, but Harold, I was drowning. I am drowning. And Tommy loves me. He'd try to fix it if he knew, and it would destroy him. So instead, you decided to destroy me. I decided to borrow from someone who could afford it." Her voice flared with anger again. "You live in a house worth $200,000. You have investments, savings, a pension. I'm 20 years younger than you, and I'll never have half of what you take for granted." Harold stared at this woman, This stranger who'd been living in his son's house, eating at his dinner table, accepting his kindness while systematically robbing him blind. "Cindy, do you love my son?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Yes, of course I do." "Do you? Or do you love the idea of him? The stability he represents, the family connection, the respectability?" She faltered, her hands twisting in her lap again. "I care about him. I want us to have a good life together." "But do you love him?" The silence stretched between them. Outside, Harold could hear children playing in the street, their voices bright with the simple joy of an autumn afternoon. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt very far away from this room. "I don't know," Cindy whispered finally. "I thought I did. I wanted to. But everything got so complicated. And I don't know anything anymore." Harold felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness. He wasn't ready for that yet. But understanding, maybe. The recognition that Cindy was as trapped as he'd been, just in a different kind of cage. "What happened to your other husbands?" They found out. About the debts, about the borrowing. "The first one just kicked me out, changed the locks while I was at work, and left my stuff on the lawn." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "The second one was kinder. He helped me get set up in an apartment, even gave me some money to start over. Said he hoped I'd find whatever I was looking for." "And did you find what you were looking for?" Cindy looked around Harold's living room, at the family photos, the comfortable furniture, the settled peace of a life well lived. "I thought I did. This house, this family, this feeling of belonging somewhere. It felt real." "It was real. You made it unreal." "I know." Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through her makeup. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Harold." Harold had never heard Cindy swear before. Even now, falling apart in his living room, she'd maintained her careful presentation. This felt like the first honest thing she'd said to him in 2 years. "What do you want me to do, Cindy?" "I don't know. I can't go to prison. I can't start over again. I'm 34 years old, and I don't know how to do anything except be someone's wife." Harold stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd lived for more than 2 decades. Martha's porch light was on, a warm beacon in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in this quiet neighborhood, families were sitting down to dinner, helping children with homework, living the ordinary lives that Harold had taken for granted until they were threatened. "Cindy, I want you to pack your things and leave tonight." "Harold, I want you to tell Tommy the truth, all of it, the debts, the other marriages, the money you took from me." He turned back to face her. "And then I want you to disappear from our lives." "What about the money?" "What about it?" "I can't pay it back. Not right away. Maybe not ever." Harold felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time in days, he knew exactly what he needed to do. "The money's gone, Cindy. I accept that. But my son's happiness isn't gone. His future isn't gone. His chance to find someone who actually loves him isn't gone." Harold moved to the door and held it open. "Get out of my house." Cindy stood slowly, her movements uncertain. "Harold, if I tell Tommy everything, he'll hate me. Maybe. Or maybe he'll understand that you're sick and he'll try to help you get well. Either way, that's between you and him." She walked to the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I did care about you. You're a good man. You deserved better." "Yes," Harold said simply. "I did." After Cindy left, Harold sat in his chair and listened to the house settle around him. Emma's grandfather clock chimed 8 times, marking another day survived, another crisis weathered. His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Everything okay?" Harold typed back, "Getting there." And for the first time in weeks, he actually believed it might be true. The knock on Harold's door came at 10:30 that night, sharp and insistent. Harold had been sitting in Emma's chair by the window, watching the street and thinking about choices, the ones he'd made, the ones that had been made for him, and the ones still to come. He wasn't surprised to see Tommy on his porch, but he was surprised by the look on his son's face. Tommy looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "She's gone," Tommy said without preamble. Harold opened the door wider. "Come in, son." Tommy walked into the living room like a man in a daze. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much truth too fast. "She packed everything, left a note on the kitchen table." Tommy pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Said she told you everything. Said I should ask you to explain." Harold gestured to the sofa. "Sit down." "Dad, I need to know. What did she tell you?" Harold moved to his chair, the one that had become his anchor in the storm of recent days. "She told me about the debt." $53,000, maybe more." Tommy's face went pale. 53,000? Credit cards, mostly, from before she met you and some after. Harold's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "She's been married twice before, son, both times to older men with money. Both marriages ended when the money ran out." Tommy made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Jesus Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Harold had rarely heard his son swear. Even as a teenager, Tommy had been careful with his language, mindful of his mother's disapproval of crude talk. "She said she loved you," Harold continued, "or thought she did. But when I pressed her on it, she admitted she wasn't sure anymore." Tommy buried his face in his hands. 2 years, Dad, 2 years of my life. I was ready to have kids with her. I was looking at houses, planning our future. Son, she made me feel like I was going crazy. Like I couldn't trust my own judgment about anything." Tommy looked up, his eyes wet. "She convinced me you were losing your mind. Made me doubt my own father." Harold felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, but this time it was clean anger, protective anger, the kind a man felt when someone hurt his child. "Tommy, she's sick. What she did to both of us, that's not normal behavior. That's not love. And it's not marriage. That's predation." "I know. I think I've known for a while, but I didn't want to see it." Tommy wiped his face with his sleeve. "Dad, how much did she steal from you?" "About 1,800 that I can prove. Probably more that I can't." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring at the family photos on Harold's mantel. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of Tommy's high school graduation and his first wedding, the real one to Sarah, that had lasted 7 years and ended amicably when they realized they wanted different things. "I'll pay you back," Tommy said finally. "You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do. It's my responsibility. I brought her into this family. I gave her access to you." Tommy's voice was thick with shame. "I chose her over you, Dad. When you tried to warn me, I chose her." Harold leaned forward in his chair. "Tommy, look at me." His son raised his head. "You didn't choose her over me. You chose what you thought was love over suspicion. You chose hope over cynicism. Those aren't character flaws, son. Those are the things that make you a good man. A good man wouldn't have been so easily fooled. A good man wouldn't have been so easily fooled twice," Harold corrected. You learned something about people tonight, about how they can use your own goodness against you. That's a hard lesson, but it's one worth learning." Tommy was quiet for a while, processing. Harold could almost see the wheels turning in his son's head, reassessing 2 years of memories through the lens of new knowledge. "What happens now?" Tommy asked. "Now you decide what kind of man you want to be going forward, whether you're going to let this make you bitter and suspicious, or whether you're going to get smarter about protecting what matters to you." "And what about Cindy?" Harold considered this. "What about her? Do we press charges? Try to get the money back? What? That's not up to us anymore. Cindy made her choices. Now she has to live with them." Harold stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. "But I'll tell you what I've decided. I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left being angry about money that's already gone. Life's too short, and I've got better things to do with my time." Tommy joined him at the window. "Like what?" Harold smiled, thinking about Martha's apple crisp cooling on his kitchen counter, about the way she'd stood by him when everyone else was ready to believe the worst. "Like figuring out how to live again instead of just surviving." "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you lonely? I mean, really lonely?" Harold thought about the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I'm learning the difference between being alone and being lonely. They're not the same thing." "What's the difference?" "Being alone is a circumstance. Being lonely is a choice." Harold put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I chose to be lonely for a while after your mother died. It felt right, like honoring her memory. But at some point, that choice stops honoring the dead and starts dishonoring the living." Tommy nodded slowly. "Mom wouldn't want you to be lonely." "No, she wouldn't. She'd want me to be happy. And she'd want you to be happy too, son. Really happy, with someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can provide." They stood together in comfortable silence, father and son, looking out at the neighborhood where Tommy had grown up and Harold had built his life. The street was empty now, porch lights glowing like beacons of home and safety. "Dad, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. I doubted you. I thought you were getting old and confused and maybe a little inappropriate with my wife. I was ready to believe that before I was ready to believe she was lying." Harold turned to face his son fully. "Tommy, she's a professional. What she did to us, she's done it before. She knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make us doubt ourselves and each other. The fact that it worked doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." Tommy's eyes filled again. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son." They hugged then, the first real hug they'd shared since Emma's funeral. Harold felt something healing in his chest, some fracture that had been aching for months finally beginning to mend. "What do we do tomorrow?" Tommy asked. Harold smiled. "Tomorrow we start over. Clean slate, fresh start, whatever you want to call it. We remember who we are and what we mean to each other." "And Martha?" Harold felt his cheeks warm slightly. "What about Martha?" "Dad, I'm not blind. I see the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. We're friends. Good friends. Mom would like her." "You think so?" Tommy grinned, the first genuine smile Harold had seen from his son in months. "Dad, Mom would have been pushing you toward Martha since about a week after the funeral. She never could stand to see people waste time being miserable when they could be happy instead." Harold laughed, and the sound surprised him. When was the last time he'd laughed, really laughed, with joy instead of politeness? "Your mother was a wise woman. Yeah, she was. And she raised a pretty decent son, too. Harold looked at Tommy, really looked at him. The boy was gone, had been gone for years, but the man who'd replaced him was someone Harold could be proud of. Someone Emma would have been proud of. Yes, Harold said. She did. Outside, a car pulled into Martha's driveway. Harold watched her get out, her arms full of grocery bags, and felt something warm and hopeful flutter in his chest. Maybe it was time to stop just surviving and start living again. Maybe it was time to remember what happiness felt like. 3 weeks later, Harold was making Sunday dinner when Martha knocked on his back door. Not the tentative knock of a neighbor checking on a friend, but the confident rap of someone who belonged. Harold wiped his hands on Emma's old apron. He'd started wearing it again, finding comfort in the familiar ritual, and opened the door to find Martha holding a covered dish and wearing the smile that had become the best part of his days. "Apple crisp," she announced, "and before you say you don't need it, remember that I made it for me as much as for you. Pete always said my cooking was wasted on an audience of one." Harold stepped aside to let her in, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar that clung to the dish. "Tommy's coming for dinner. You're welcome to join us." "I was hoping you'd ask." Martha set the crisp on the counter and surveyed his preparations. Pot roast in the slow cooker, potatoes boiling on the stove, green beans waiting to be steamed. "Looks like you've got everything under control." "Getting there." Harold checked the potatoes with a fork. "Martha, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you help me? Really? I know what you said about Pete and Emma and doing the right thing, but there's more to it than that." Martha leaned against the counter, considering her words carefully. "When Pete was sick, really sick, near the end, people started treating him differently. Like he wasn't quite himself anymore, like the disease had erased the man I'd loved for 32 years. Harold turned from the stove to face her fully. "They meant well," Martha continued, "but they talked over him, made decisions for him, acted like he couldn't be trusted to know his own mind. It drove him crazy, and it drove me crazy watching it happen. And you saw the same thing happening to me. I saw a good man being told he was losing his mind by people who should have known better. I saw someone being isolated and undermined by the person who was supposed to love him most." Martha's voice was steady, but Harold could hear the old anger underneath. "I swore after Pete died that I'd never stand by and watch that happen to someone else." Harold reached for her hand, finding it warm and steady in his. "Thank you. Thank me by being happy, Harold Mitchell. That's all the thanks I need." The sound of a truck in the driveway interrupted them. Tommy was early, which had become his habit since Cindy left. As if he was making up for lost time, reclaiming his place in his father's life through the simple act of showing up. Harold watched through the window as his son got out of the truck, moving with more energy than he'd shown in months. The hollow look was gone from Tommy's eyes, replaced by something Harold had almost forgotten. Contentment. "How's he doing?" Martha asked, following Harold's gaze. "Better. He filed for divorce last week. Clean break, no contest. Cindy's already moved back to Arkansas. And the money? Gone. But Tommy's been helping me set up new accounts, new passwords, new everything. We'll be more careful going forward." Tommy knocked once and let himself in, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a grin that reminded Harold of the boy who used to burst through that same door after school, full of stories about his day. "Dad, Martha." He hugged them both, unself-conscious in his affection. "Something smells incredible. Your father's been cooking all afternoon," Martha said. "I just provided dessert." "Apple crisp?" Tommy's eyes lit up. Dad, you better marry this woman before someone else figures out how lucky they'd be to have her. Harold felt his cheeks burn, but Martha just laughed. Your son has excellent taste in desserts. Among other things, Tommy said, opening the wine with the ease of someone who'd found his footing again. Dad, I have news. Good news or bad news? Good news. Great news, actually. Tommy poured wine for all three of them, his movements confident and sure. I got a call from Jim Hartley at the bank this morning. Turns out Cindy used my name and social security number to open several credit accounts without my knowledge. Identity theft. Harold set down his wine glass. Tommy, it's okay, Dad. It's actually better than okay. The bank's fraud department is handling it, the debts are being discharged, and my credit's being restored. Turns out I'm not financially ruined after all. Martha raised her glass. That calls for a toast. To fresh starts, Harold said. To second chances, Tommy added. To family, Martha finished. They clinked glasses, and Harold felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. No shadows, no doubts, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just the simple pleasure of being surrounded by people who loved him. Dinner was everything a Sunday meal should be. Conversation flowed as easily as the wine, touching on everything and nothing. Tommy's plans to start dating again, Martha's garden preparations for spring, Harold's decision to finally clear out Emma's closet and donate her clothes to the church. She'd like that, Tommy said, when Harold mentioned his plan. Mom always said her things should go to people who could use them, not sit in a closet gathering dust. I kept a few things, Harold admitted. Her wedding ring, some photos, that blue dress she wore to your graduation. The important things, Martha said gently. Yeah, the important things. As they cleaned up after dinner, Tommy's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. Sarah's in town visiting her sister. Asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime this week. Harold raised an eyebrow. Sarah had been Tommy's first wife, the one who'd gotten away through mutual incompatibility rather than betrayal or drama. Coffee sounds nice, Harold said carefully. Just coffee, as friends. We both agreed we were better as friends than as spouses. Tommy dried a plate and added it to the stack. But it'll be good to see her. Good to remember what it feels like to talk to someone who actually knew me before I became whoever Cindy wanted me to be. After the dishes were done and the leftovers properly stored, Martha and Tommy sat on the front porch while Harold put on coffee. Through the kitchen window, he could see them talking quietly, Martha's head tilted toward Tommy in the gesture of someone really listening. His son needed that. Someone besides his father to talk through the wreckage of his marriage and the process of rebuilding his life. Martha would be good for Tommy, Harold realized, not as a replacement for his mother, but as someone who understood the difference between helping and hovering. Harold carried 3 mugs of coffee to the porch, where Tommy was telling Martha about his plans to take a woodworking class at the community college. Always wanted to try it, Tommy was saying. Dad taught me the basics when I was a kid, but I never had the time or space to do much with it. Your father made the most beautiful jewelry box for your mother's birthday one year, Martha said, accepting her coffee with a grateful smile. Hand-carved roses on the lid, perfect tiny hinges. I remember that, Tommy said. Took him 6 months in the garage. Mom cried when she saw it. Harold settled into his chair, Emma's old rocking chair that had become his thinking spot, and listened to them talk about him like he wasn't there. But it wasn't the dismissive talk of people managing an elderly relative. It was the fond talk of people who cared about him, who saw his life as something worth celebrating. "Dad," Tommy said suddenly, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." "Shoot. Are you happy?" The question caught Harold off guard, not because it was difficult to answer, but because he realized he hadn't asked it of himself in years. Not since Emma's diagnosis, maybe even before that. You know what? Harold rocked slowly in his chair, looking out at the street where he'd lived for more than 20 years. "I think I am. Or I'm getting there." "Good," Tommy said simply. "You deserve to be happy." As the evening wound down and Tommy prepared to leave, he hugged his father with the fierce intensity of someone making up for lost time. "I love you, Dad, and I'm sorry for everything. For doubting you, for bringing her into our lives, for almost letting her destroy what we have." Harold held his son tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave and the autumn air that clung to his jacket. "Son, what we have can't be destroyed by someone like Cindy. It can be damaged. It can be tested, but it can't be destroyed. Not if we don't let it." After Tommy left, Harold and Martha sat on the porch in comfortable silence. The neighborhood was settling into evening quiet, porch lights coming on, families finishing their Sunday routines, children being called in for baths and bedtime stories. "Harold," Martha said eventually, "can I ask you something personal? Haven't you been asking me personal questions for 3 weeks now?" She laughed. "This one's different, more personal. Ask away. Are you ready to stop just surviving and start living again?" Harold looked at this woman who'd stood by him when his own family wouldn't, who'd helped him fight for his dignity and his sanity, who'd brought apple crisp and unwavering loyalty into his life when he needed both most desperately. "Martha Henderson," he said, "would you like to have dinner with me sometime? A real dinner, not just leftovers and crisis management?" Her smile lit up the porch better than any light bulb ever could. "Harold Mitchell, I thought you'd never ask." And sitting there on his front porch, watching the stars come out over the neighborhood where he'd built his life, Harold felt something he hadn't experienced in almost 2 years, the sweet anticipation of tomorrow. 6 months later, Harold was teaching his grandson how to tie a proper knot when the phone rang with news that would have once shattered his world. Cindy had been arrested in Little Rock, charged with elder fraud and identity theft. A 78-year-old widower had lost his life savings, nearly $40,000, before his daughter discovered the scheme. The local prosecutor wanted to know if Harold would testify about his own experience, help build a pattern that might put Cindy away for good. Harold listened to the detective's request while watching 8-year-old Michael struggle with the fishing line, Tommy's boy from his first marriage, who spent every other weekend learning the things his grandfather had taught his father 30 years before. "I'll think about it," Harold told the detective, then hung up and returned his attention to the more important lesson at hand. "Like this, Grandpa?" Michael held up the hook, the knot crude but functional. "Perfect. Your dad tied his first knot exactly like that." Martha appeared on the back porch with a pitcher of lemonade and the kind of smile that had become Harold's favorite sight in the world. She'd moved in 3 months ago, into the guest room. She was careful to tell the church ladies, though Harold suspected that fooled exactly no one. They were planning a small wedding for the fall, nothing fancy, just family and close friends gathered in Emma's garden. "Any bites yet?" she called. "Just nibbles," Harold called back. "But the fish aren't really the point, are they, Michael?" The boy grinned, gap-toothed and content. "Nope. The point is sitting still long enough to think." Smart kid. Harold had learned more about sitting still and thinking in the past 6 months than in the previous 63 years combined. He'd learned the difference between loneliness and solitude, between keeping peace and enabling harm, between surviving and living. Most importantly, he'd learned that dignity wasn't something that could be taken from you, only something you could give away. Tommy appeared around the corner of the house, home from his Saturday morning errands, carrying grocery bags and wearing the relaxed expression of a man who'd found his footing again. He'd been dating Sarah, carefully, tentatively, two middle-aged people who'd learned the difference between love and need. Nothing might come of it, but that was okay too. Tommy had learned to be content with his own company, and that was the foundation everything else could build on. "Dad, there's a message on your machine," Tommy said, setting the groceries on the porch steps. "From that detective in Arkansas." Harold nodded, but didn't move to answer it. The fish were biting, not literally, but metaphorically. Michael was learning patience, Martha was humming while she arranged wildflowers in a mason jar, and Tommy was home where he belonged. The detective's questions could wait. They would always be there, those questions about justice and punishment and making people pay for their crimes. But Harold had discovered something more valuable than revenge: the simple pleasure of an ordinary Saturday morning, spent with people who loved him, not for what he could provide, but for who he was. "Will you testify?" Tommy asked quietly, settling onto the porch steps beside Martha. "I don't know yet," Harold said honestly. "Part of me thinks Cindy needs to face consequences for what she's done. But another part thinks maybe the best revenge is just being happy without her." Martha set down her flower arranging and looked at him with the direct gaze that had first convinced him she was someone worth trusting. What would Emma say? Harold considered this, watching his fishing line drift in the slow current of Miller's Creek. Emma had been gone for over 2 years now, but her voice still echoed clearly in his memory when he needed guidance. Emma would say that justice and mercy aren't opposites, that sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for someone is let them face the full consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most just thing you can do is forgive and move on, Martha added. "Yeah, that too." Michael looked up from his fishing rod, his young face serious with the weight of trying to understand adult complexities. "Grandpa, what's the right answer?" Harold smiled at his grandson, this boy who carried his blood and his name, and hopefully some measure of his values, into the future. "The right answer, kiddo, is that sometimes there isn't a right answer. Sometimes there's just the answer you can live with." The afternoon stretched ahead of them, golden and unhurried. Later, they would clean the fish they caught, if any, and Martha would fry them with cornmeal and serve them with her famous hush puppies. Tommy would tell stories about his week at work. Michael would chatter about school and friends and the 100 small adventures that filled a child's days. And Harold would sit at the head of his own table in his own house, surrounded by people who chose to be there not out of obligation or manipulation, but out of love. The phone would ring again. It always did, with news of the outside world and its endless complications. But for now, in this moment, Harold Mitchell was exactly where he belonged, at peace with his choices, grateful for his blessings, and ready for whatever came next. The fish weren't biting, but that was okay. The important things were